Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're on a mission, really, for you, the listener.
Mhm.
We want to piece together this profound and I think often contradictory puzzle of defining adulthood.
And specifically, that second half of life.
Exactly. How we build a coherent, satisfying story for ourselves once we're past, the midpoint, past
Yeah.
middle age.
Right.
We've been looking through some fascinating sources, philosophical texts, psychological research, and what they seem to show is that growing up it's a never-ending job.
And it's not just about, say, managing assets or retirement planning.
No.
It's about what you might call existential accounting.
Existential accounting, I like that.
It really is. It's about taking a full inventory of the choices you've made, the paths you didn't take, and then assigning some kind of durable meaning to all of it.
In a way that lets you look forward without regret.
Exactly. It's the ultimate internal audit.
So where do we even begin an audit like that? If we want to look at the philosophical roots of maturity, I guess we have to start with Kant.
We have to. For Kant, maturity isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a continuous, unstable task.
Unstable, that's an interesting word for it.
It is. Because he says it's about holding the gap between the world as it is, reality, and the world as it ought to be, your ideal,
And holding those two things in balance.
in what he called a permanent, precarious balance. You're always in that tension. You're never really done finding your footing.
A permanent, precarious balance. Honestly, that sounds exhausting.
It can be.
Because what society sells us is a much simpler story, right? It equates maturity with resignation.
A capitulation to the status quo.
Right. The idea that you just stop dreaming, you accept the world for what it is, and you get on with it.
But our sources suggest that's not it at all. If growing up means facing that chasm between reality and the ideal, then true growth actually requires courage.
Not resignation.
Not resignation. To sustain that balance, you have to constantly resist being complacent. It's almost a defiant act to try and live an examined life after 50.
And that defiance, that leads us to some really surprising data.
Oh, absolutely.
Empirical evidence that just completely contradicts the cultural script we're always fed about, post-midlife decline.
The story is things get worse. The data says they get better.
How so?
Well, there are studies from 72 countries, and they all report this finding that researchers call the U-bend.
The U-bend.
Yeah, it shows that people report being increasingly unhappy, more stressed, up until middle age.
That's bottom of the U.
Right. But then, after that point, regardless of social or economic status, they report becoming steadily happier. The trough is real, but so is the rebound.
That's amazing. So you're saying that even if things objectively aren't perfect, maybe more aches and pains, new financial pressures, subjectively, people feel better.
It's remarkably consistent across the globe. Researchers have even pinpointed the average global low point for happiness.
When is it?
It's right around age 46.
Wow.
But you see these fascinating variations, like the Swiss hit bottom early at 35. Maybe it's the high standards.
Yeah.
In other places.
Ukrainians, they hit it much later at 62. But the overall shape of that curve is just undeniable. After the slump, happiness rises.
Okay, so this can't just be about lowering your expectations. That's the cynical take, right?
Right, I expected less, so I'm happier. It's not that.
There have to be some real internal mechanisms at work here that help us build this rosier life story.
And there are. Our brains actually start helping us out.
What do you mean? What kind of neurological shifts are we talking about?
Neuroimaging shows that the aging hippocampus, which is, critical for memory, it starts to reduce its memory for negative images.
Really?
It actively favors encoding and retrieving what the sources call rosier experiences.
So our brain becomes our own personal highlight reel editor. It starts curating our autobiography for us.
In a way, yes. It's a huge psychological advantage when you're trying to build a coherent, positive story.
And is that the only change?
No, the editing is just one part. There's also a documented shift in which hemisphere of the brain is dominant.
In youth, it's often the right hemisphere. That's the season of daring, of navigating what are truly uncharted waters.
Intuition, raw emotion, just jumping in.
Exactly. But in our more mature years, the brain tends to shift dominance over to the left hemisphere.
And that's where we store, what? Logic.
Structure, logic, and crucially, these abstract representations of knowledge. This shift is what we associate with wisdom, seeing new challenges through the prism of vast past experience.
So it's a move from sheer potential to experience mastery. How does that actually play out in real life?
It's all about something called cognitive templates.
Cognitive templates.
Right. As we get older, we build up this huge library of mental blueprints, these generalized patterns from problems we've solved before.
Okay, I think I follow.
So a younger person faces a complex problem, say a conflict at work. They have to solve it from scratch.
Right.
But a mature person with that left hemisphere shift, they instantly recognize the pattern. They realize, oh, this isn't new. This is just variation X of the Y conflict I solved 20 years ago.
So new problems are really just old problems in new clothes.
More and more, yes.
Yes.
It drastically reduces the cognitive load and it boosts confidence. We stop seeing unique threats and we start seeing solvable patterns.
That feels like the neurological foundation of wisdom right there.
It is, but wisdom alone isn't enough to build your story. You also need this internal reconciliation.
You need the tools to look back at all the past chapters and say, yes, these all belong in the same book.
And that brings us right back to Kant.
His maxim of consistency: be in agreement with oneself.
Exactly.
But how do you, the listener, actually measure that? How do you know if you're in agreement with the person you've become?
For that, there's a powerful thought experiment from Nietzsche. It's the ultimate test of your narrative's coherence. He called it the eternal return.
The eternal return, okay.
He asks you to imagine your entire life, everything in it, the good, the bad, the joys, the deepest pains recurring forever, exactly as it was.
And the question is?
Would you affirm it? Would you say, yes,
Yeah.
I want this exact life, again and again?
That's a heavy question. It makes the stakes of every choice incredibly high. But is it even possible to say yes to all of it? To the suffering?
Well, that's the tension. Affirmation doesn't mean you enjoyed the suffering,
Right.
but it means you recognize that those painful parts were necessary to forge the person you are today, the very person you're trying to affirm. It forces you to take total ownership of the whole story.
And what if the answer is no? What does that look like?
Well, the philosopher David Hume actually described that pattern centuries ago. He said when you ask people if they lived the last 10 years over, they always say no.
But what's the follow-up?
They immediately say, but the next 20, they say, will be better.
Ah, so it's that constant deferral of happiness,
Uh-huh.
always waiting for the next chapter to be the good one.
Yes. It shows a profound failure of internal consistency. It means you're living a life that you're actively hoping to discard later. The present is just a placeholder.
So if your answer sounds like Hume's, if you're always pushing affirmation into the future,
The sources basically say you better get to work on the parts of your life you can change. Immediately.
and that work involves a dialogue, you said?
A continuous and often difficult dialogue. Not just with your younger self, but also with the choices and assumptions made by your parents, by your culture,
Because their choices were made for a different time.
a time that isn't this one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't reject any of their expectations or assumptions, then you're not really grown up yet. You're just living a deferred identity.
So true maturity means sifting through all that inherited stuff, the career path, the social norms, and consciously deciding what you keep and what you reject.
To forge your own story for this moment.
And that's where it gets really hard, because society puts up a lot of obstacles.
It does. We are surrounded by forces that actively undermine this whole process, making real maturity feel like an act of resistance, even rebellion.
It's the ultimate mixed message.
It really is. Half the messages are, get serious, stop dreaming.
Except the status quo.
And the other half blasts us with products and suggestions that are meant to keep us young.
We're told to resign ourselves to decline while also being shamed for aging.
And the moment you try to live that earnest, committed Kantian life, the one that confronts the gap between what is and what ought to be, you risk being dismissed.
We're ridiculed.
The fear of being called childish or naive is often a much easier motivator than mustering the courage to speak out. We're terrified of embarrassment.
And we even do it to ourselves
So,
with our language. Think about joking about a senior moment when you forget something.
right.
That joke seems harmless, but it reflects this unnecessary help or haplessness, and it sends a really negative message to the young people who are watching us.
It reinforces the idea that aging is just inevitable decline. And then you get that common advice to young people,
Enjoy the best years of your lives.
which contains this really ominous message. Everything else will be worse. Who would want to grow up if that's the picture we paint?
So the societal vision of adulthood becomes this sour brew.
A sour brew, yes. When we say someone is serious, we mean grim or dour, not earnest or wholehearted or committed.
The culture makes maturity feel like a reduction of the self, not an expansion.
which, of course, serves the status quo.
Yeah.
It encourages us to long for the past instead of investing in a more courageous future.
So this brings us back to the beginning. If building this coherent life story is a lifelong, defiant project, what does that construction process even look like day to day? It reminds me of that metaphor Neurath's boat.
That is the perfect metaphor for this. We're like sailors who have to rebuild their ship while they're on the open sea,
Right.
without ever being able to pull it into a dry dock and reconstruct it from the best parts. You're fixing the hull and replacing the mast while you're still sailing.
You don't get to stop time. You don't get to pull your life out of the water and rebuild it perfectly. You have to make these huge existential decisions in real time.
Under pressure, with the resources you have right now, it perfectly captures the instability of being grown up. You never reach some stable, perfect peak,
You reach what you think is a peak.
and you realize it's just a foothill,
Oh,
and the task demands you go down a bit and start climbing again.
yeah.
It's a process of reaching these temporary plateaus.
So the strength in all this really comes from just embracing that precarious balance, having the courage to forge a story you can affirm, even when the world is telling you adulthood is a disappointment.
And for our final thought today, we'll go back to Kant. Society so often holds up the refusal to accept the world as it's given, the world as it is, as some kind of infantile
A
weakness.
failure to accept reality.
Right. But Kant saw that refusal as precisely human strength. He believed it stems from the voice of our own critical reason. So if we recognize that defiance as our strength, our question for you is this. What part of your current reality, a personal expectation, a societal assumption, do you have the clarity and the courage to refuse?